Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into, a really fascinating corner of history, the Mongol Empire. When you hear that name, you often think of figures like Genghis Khan, conquering vast lands.
Right, the big campaigns.
Exactly. But your sources for this deep dive highlight something crucial. The politics within this immense empire were profoundly shaped by powerful women, not just the male rulers.
That's absolutely right. We see influence from women like Holun, Berthe, Yusui mothers, chief consorts. But the sources you've shared let us zoom in on someone who went, way beyond just influence.
Töregene Khatun.
Töregene Khatun. She didn't just sway a ruler, she was the ruler, the regent who held ultimate power over the Mongol realm for a really critical period.
And that's our mission today, isn't it? We're going to try and extract the most important insights from your sources to really understand Töregene Khatun's extraordinary journey.
Yeah, piece it together.
We'll look at her origins, how she navigated the complex and frankly dangerous imperial family dynamic.
Very dangerous.
How she managed to seize control after Ögedei Khan died, the unprecedented power she wielded as regent, some of the, let's say, highly controversial methods and policies she used.
Oh yes, definitely controversial.
And ultimately, the dramatic, and it really is tragic, end of her time at the top.
Think of this as a shortcut, maybe. A way to get a handle on this hidden story of ambition, political genius, maybe ruthlessness too.
Yeah, sheer determination.
And sheer determination, exactly. That allowed this one woman to stand at the helm of the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen. And it's all drawn directly from the details in these sources.
So get ready for some surprising facts, I think.
Hopefully some real aha moments too.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Who was Töregene Khatun before she was, running the known world? Where did she actually come from, according to these sources?
Okay, so the sources place her birth around 1185. She was originally from the Naiman tribe, one of the key Mongol confederations at the time.
Naiman, right.
And when she was still quite young, maybe not even 20, she entered into an alliance marriage.
A political marriage, essentially.
Exactly. She married Kudu, who was the son of the merchant chief Tokuan. Standard practice, really using marriage to build ties between tribes.
Okay, so that sets her on a certain path, but then things changed pretty dramatically for her, didn't they? What happened?
They did. Big change. In 1204, Genghis Khan is unifying the tribes, right? He fights the merchants.
And Töregene?
Töregene gets captured during this conflict. But here's a really crucial detail the sources emphasize. Genghis Khan didn't just treat her like any other war captive.
Oh, how so?
He showed her, apparently, remarkable respect and care.
That seems significant. Was that unusual for the time?
Well, yes and no. Mongol tradition did have ways to respect capable, noble women captured in war.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'd be incorporated into the conquering tribe.
Okay.
But what stands out here, according to the sources, is the degree of respect Genghis showed her. He must have seen something in her, her character, her intelligence, perhaps.
Instead of just assigning her somewhere lower down?
Exactly. He chose to marry her to his own son, Ögedei.
Wow. Okay, that's a massive shift in status then. From a captive merchant bride to a daughter-in-law of Genghis Khan himself, part of the Imperial family.
Absolutely. A pivotal moment. It instantly elevated her position within this burgeoning Mongol hierarchy.
So she's married to Ögedei, who's on track to become Great Khan, but like you hear with these ruling families, he had multiple wives.
Oh, definitely.
What was her position like within Ögedei's household? Was she like the main wife?
No, she wasn't actually. Polygamy, maintaining a substantial harem that was standard for Mongol nobles. Ögedei's first and chief consort, the one with the highest status, was Töregene Khatun.
Töregene.
And key detail here, at this point, Töregene hadn't yet had children with Ögedei.
Ah, and this is where Töregene found an opening, maybe.
Precisely. The sources highlight that Töregene, quite quickly, gave birth to her first son, Gyuk, in 1206.
Gyuk, okay. The future Khan.
The future Khan. And she went on to have other sons, Khotun, Kuchu, Karashar, and Kashi. Having sons, especially the eldest son like Gyuk, was incredibly important.
For status, for influence.
Exactly. Solidified her status, her potential future influence within the family, within the empire. These births strengthened her position significantly.
But didn't necessarily make her Ögedei's favorite.
No, not necessarily his most beloved.
Yeah.
Töregene Khatun remained a very powerful figure in her own right.
So there's this complex internal dynamic already bubbling away inside Ögedei's family, even while Genghis Khan is still building the empire.
Right. And speaking of Genghis, he passes away in 1227. How did that impact things?
Well, Genghis Khan left behind more than just territory, right? He'd set up this structured administration, military discipline, this relentless strategy for expansion.
Yeah, the momentum was huge.
His death wasn't really a pause, it was more like a transition into a new phase. The army just kept going, the campaigns continued, conquest was tied to duty, prestige, the identity of the Mongol elite.
And that momentum was crucial for the empire, growing into the largest contiguous land empire ever within the next century.
And following tradition, parts of Genghis's own household, including some wives, were distributed among his sons. Is that right?
Yes, that's another important detail from the sources. A young woman named Mongol Khatun became part of Ögedei's household.
Ah, another player enters the scene.
Exactly. Her arrival introduced another layer of complexity, another rival for Töregene within that harem structure.
Then comes the Kurultai, the big assembly, in 1229. This is where Ögedei is officially confirmed as Great Khan, fulfilling his father's wishes.
Correct. His brothers, Chagatai and Tului, supported him, which made for a relatively smooth transfer of power.
And with Ögedei elevated, Töregene becomes a Khansha, an empress.
She does.
Yeah.
But importantly, not the only empress. Batu Khan and Mog were also there. And the sources make it pretty clear this environment just set the stage for a significant ongoing rivalry between these three powerful women.
Sounds like constant tension. How did Ögedei handle that?
He had to navigate it, didn't he? The competition wasn't just personal squabbles. The sources show it had real effects on how the court was run. It created this persistent internal friction. Mage, interestingly, is sometimes depicted as trying to operate a bit outside the direct conflict, using secret alliances, strategic moves.
But she still had her own ambitions.
Oh, absolutely. She had her own ambitions, her own interests at stake.
So Ögedei knew about this rivalry. He saw the impact.
He did. The sources suggest he tried to balance their influence, but he never really managed to neutralize the competition entirely.
So this struggle wasn't just palace gossip.
No, not at all. It was already shaping the political landscape during Ögedei's lifetime, and crucially, it would shape the succession.
And a key insight here you mentioned is that Töregene wasn't maybe valued for her looks. Her rivals were seen as more beautiful.
That's what some sources suggest. Yeah, her strength lay elsewhere in her political sharpness, her cunning.
Plus the sons.
Coupled with the undeniable fact that she was the mother of Ögedei's eldest sons, that combination was potent. Very potent.
So she was playing a deep, strategic, long game, relying on her brain and her sons, not just charm. Did her position improve at all while Ögedei was still alive?
It did take one step forward. The chief consort, Töregene Khatun, she passed away during Ögedei's lifetime.
Okay, so one major rival gone.
One rival removed. However, Ögedei Khatun was still very highly regarded by the Khan and considered more reputable, more influential within those court circles.
Okay, so Mog is arguably the most influential consort when Ögedei dies in 1241. The sources seem to point partly to heavy drinking after a pretty successful reign overall.
Yes, generally successful, relatively long, and tradition dictated what happened next. When the great Khan died, his hearth stayed active. His tent didn't just collapse, metaphorically speaking.
So his wives kept things running.
His remaining wives were expected to maintain the daily routine, the administrative functions, basically run things on his behalf until the Kurultai could meet to pick a successor.
And Mog stepped into that role.
Mongol Khatun initially stepped into this really significant role as regent. The sources note her experience, wife to Ögedei, previously wife to Genghis, gave her a certain traditional standing.
But there's a but coming, I feel.
There is. A crucial detail mentioned is that not having a son of her own limited her potential support base, especially among those focused purely on the dynastic line.
And this is where Töregene saw her chance.
Right. This is where her political intelligence just shines through instead of, conventional mourning.
She made a move.
She immediately made a calculated political move. The sources say she was the first person to send word of Ögedei's death to his very influential brother, Chagatai.
Why Chagatai specifically?
Well, in return, Chagatai, who some sources say had wanted to marry Mogis before, but couldn't offer his support to Töregene against Mog.
Interesting, so maybe some personal animosity there too.
Possibly. A mix of political leverage and maybe some personal feelings towards Mog.
Yeah.
It was a potentially powerful alliance.
But you said potentially, it didn't last.
Unfortunately for Töregene, no. Very short-lived. Chagatai died relatively soon after Ögedei.
Oh wow, okay.
And with his death, Mongol Khatun suddenly became the single most powerful figure within Ögedei's immediate household. She was positioned to control the whole crucial process leading up to the Kurultai.
And the sources paint Murg as quite capable.
Yes, quiet perhaps, but politically effective. Deep palace alliances, dynastic connections. She posed a really significant threat to Töregene's ambitions.
So how on earth did Töregene manage to overcome that? This sounds like where her legendary cunning really kicks in.
Absolutely. Key moment. The sources detail her political brilliance, her knack for intrigue. Using her extensive network of contacts inside the palace, she systematically began to remove or sideline those advisors and officials who were close to Mongol Khatun.
Isolating her.
Exactly. Isolated Moj, weakened her support structure. But her most effective tactic, according to the sources, undermining Mogha's reputation by spreading accusations and rumors.
Rumors? What kind of rumors are we talking about?
Accusations of disloyalty, secret plotting against the state, maybe even things that sounded like treason.
Whether they were true or not.
Exactly. Regardless of truthfulness, these rumors were potent enough in that politically charged court environment to severely damage Mongol Khatun's standing.
So Mo just faded away.
Weakened and isolated, she couldn't effectively resist Töregene anymore. She's said to have quietly withdrawn from the political stage. Some sources even hint, darkly, at Töregene's possible involvement in Mogha's subsequent quiet death, though that's less confirmed.
So with her main rivals out of the picture, Töregene was finally free to step into that power vacuum.
Exactly. Obstacles removed, Töregene seized control. Control of Ögedei's household, and crucially, the administrative functions of the entire empire.
And the sources are clear, she wasn't just keeping the seat warm.
Not at all. She wasn't content to be a placeholder regent waiting for some male successor. She fully intended to rule, to act as a sovereign, just like the men who led the conquering armies. The sources note the Mongols had simply never seen a woman with such intense ambition, such a political drive.
No, even without Barakhin and Mog, the succession wasn't totally clear-cut, was it? Didn't Ögedei name someone before he died?
He had. Ögedei had formally designated his grandson, Shermon, the son of his own son, Kochu, as his heir.
Okay, so there was a designated heir.
There was, but here's a critical insight. While the ruler's designation carried weight in Mongol tradition, the actual successor was ultimately decided by the power dynamics and alliances at the time the Kurultai met.
So the designation wasn't binding if the power wasn't there to back it up.
Precisely. And Töregene, despite Sherman being Ögedei's choice, did not support him.
Why not? He was family.
Because Sherman's mother, Ögedei Khatun, was herself a potential rival, another woman who could wield influence if her son became Khan.
So it became this complex dynamic, almost like a mother-in-law versus daughter-in-law fight, but playing out at the highest levels of imperial politics.
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah. Töregene's primary motivation was maintaining her own influence and control. So she decided her own son had to be the next great Khan. Gyukik. Driven by this desire to rule, and strongly encouraged by some key advisors who championed Gyuk, she focused everything on putting him on the throne.
Even though Gyuk, as the sources indicate, had actually fallen out of favor with his own father, Ögedei, during his lifetime.
Yes, that's another layer of complexity. Gyuk had caused significant friction during the European campaign. He'd clashed particularly badly with Batu, head of the Golden Horde.
Batu, okay, a major player.
Huge player. The sources describe Gyuk as displaying arrogance, disrespect towards other senior princes. His father, Ögedei, had reportedly reprimanded him severely.
Pulled him from command.
Removed him from command, ordered him back towards China. So you have the situation. The chosen heir is Sherman, a grandson. Töregene's favorite son, Gyuk, had been publicly humiliated and sidelined by the late Khan himself.
How could someone like Gyuk, with dozens of other potential candidates, possibly become Khan? It seems like an almost impossible political climb.
Incredibly challenging. But the sources show Töregene was absolutely up to the task. She deliberately delayed convening the Kurultai, the assembly that would choose the next Khan.
For how long?
For a full 5 years after Ögedei's death.
5 years. That's a staggering delay. What was she doing during that time? What were her strategies?
During this unprecedented delay, she used 3 key strategies, as detailed in the sources. First, patronage.
Money.
Lots of it. She opened the imperial treasury, used lavish gifts to curry favor with the Mongol and Turkic nobles whose votes and support would be critical at the Kurultai. She essentially bought loyalty, neutralized opposition with wealth.
Okay, direct appeal through reward. What was strategy number 2?
Second, she implemented a systematic purge of the existing administration. Key bureaucrats, central administrators from Ögedei's time, Figures like Qingkai and Mahmud Yalavak.
Experienced people.
Very experienced. They came under immense pressure. Finding their positions basically untenable, they were forced to seek refuge with alternative power centers within the empire.
And who were these alternative centers she was pushing them towards? Where did they go?
Well, one was Töregene's other son, Khatun.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Khatun apparently didn't agree with his mother's maneuvering to elevate Gyuk. He became a sort of figurehead for those who opposed her.
And the other?
The other major figure was Batu, head of the Jochi Ulus in the west, powerful grandson of Genghis Khan.
The one Gyuk had clashed with.
Exactly. Batu not only had a strong personal dislike for Gyuk, that arrogance, their past conflicts, but he also felt he had a stronger claim to leadership after Ögedei. He argued Genghis had intended leadership to eventually pass through Yochi's line.
Okay, so patronage purges.
Oh.
What was the third strategy?
Töregene's third strategy, according to the sources, was to actively sideline the household of Tolui, Genghis's youngest son, reducing their potential influence in the succession process.
So she wasn't just sitting back and waiting. She was actively reshaping the entire political landscape, removing opponents, directing power flows.
Exactly. Töregene Khatun firmly took hold of the reins of power during this 5-year interregnum. The sources report she systematically removed governors, commanders appointed during Ögedei's reign, just kicked them out.
That must have caused huge tension.
Generated significant tension among the Mongol elite, absolutely. But her authority, her control, were such that nobody could openly oppose her or question her orders. The sources are explicit. She attained the highest level of power a woman had ever held within the Mongol political structure.
And she surrounded herself with advisors during this time, people she trusted.
She did. The sources mention she relied heavily on a circle of advisors. Many of them were Muslim, including both men and women.
And who was the most influential of these advisors? The sources must highlight someone.
The most prominent figure, definitely, was an Ismaili Muslim woman named Fatima.
Fatima, okay.
The sources describe Fatima as being extremely close to Töregene, whispering advice in her ear.
Even accused of sorcery?
Yes, even accused of using some form of magic or sorcery, Fatima played a profoundly important role in all the political maneuvers Töregene undertook at court to secure that throne for her son.
It really sounds like she was running things with a firm, maybe even ruthless hand. What about her policies? Particularly regarding the economy, the vast populations under Mongol rule.
This is where her rule becomes particularly controversial, as detailed in your sources. Töregene attempted a significant restructuring of the tax system across the conquered territories.
How so?
She implemented comprehensive censuses in communities subject to the Mongols, and then she drastically increased the tax burden.
Drastically.
The sources describe these taxes as incredibly heavy, creating immense hardship. It was so severe, apparently, that people were afraid to even openly own a horse for fear of it being taxed or just confiscated.
Wow. That's an incredibly harsh imposition.
It gets worse, according to some sources. There are accounts claiming the Mongols under Töregene even began taxing people as commodities.
Taxing people. How?
These individuals were then reportedly sold in slave markets to generate revenue for the capital, Karakorum. The sources paint a picture of Töregene's regime engaging in activities described as, well, quite destructive in its urgency to accelerate the flow of wealth towards the center.
And that level of exploitation, surely that led to resistance. People must have pushed back.
It absolutely did. The sources mention a notable rebellion led by Temüg.
Genghis Khan's younger brother.
That's the one. Well, Temüg didn't have a direct claim to the Great Khanate himself. He gathered support against Töregene's oppressive policies. He even marched towards Karakorum.
Was it successful?
His rebellion was ultimately suppressed, but the fact that it happened underscores the severity of Töregene's policies and the widespread unrest they provoked. To counter these threats and project stability, Töregene summoned her son Gyuk back to the political center from the frontiers.
Okay, so after 5 years of maneuvering, purges, patronage, delays, the Kurultai finally meets in 1246. What was the outcome? Was there still debate?
The Kurultai convened, yes, 1246, precisely 5 years after Ögedei's death. The sources describe some deliberation. Khatun, her other son, was mentioned as a potential candidate.
The one who disagreed with her.
Right. But he was apparently ill, unable to attend or campaign effectively. Shiraman's name, as Ögedei's chosen heir, was also put forward.
Whoa!
But the assembly ultimately decided he was too young to rule the vast empire. The strong implication in the sources, though, is that Töregene's 5 years of preparation, her influence, It had basically predetermined the outcome. The other names were essentially formalities.
And Guk was chosen, just as Töregene had planned all along.
Yes. After the formal discussions, the Kurultai members elected Guk as Great Khan, placed him on the throne.
Did everyone accept it? What about Batu?
That's important. The sources note that Batu, the powerful head of the Golden Horde, did not attend the Kurultai.
Why not? Fear, animosity.
Possibly fear of Töregene's power by then, certainly his animosity towards Guk. This non-attendance and his subsequent reduction of ties with the center is a really important detail. And he wasn't alone. Many warlords, regional figures out on the frontiers had grown increasingly distant from Karakorum during Töregene's regency.
So Töregene had done it, achieved her ultimate goal. Her son was Great Khan. She must have felt she was at the absolute pinnacle of power, pulling all the strings.
She had, at least in that moment of Guyuk's enthronement. The sources describe her as having successfully navigated everything to complex politics, the rivalries to place her chosen son on the highest throne. She must have felt she held incredible power. However, a critical insight from the sources is something Töregene perhaps didn't fully account for. Her son Guyuk's own distinct ambition, his desire for independent rule.
He didn't want to be his mother's puppet.
Not at all. As soon as the formal ceremonies for his enthronement were done, Guyuk began to assert his own authority and, crucially, to dismantle the very power structure his mother had so carefully constructed to get him there.
And that included getting rid of her key people, her advisors.
Absolutely. The sources are clear. While he couldn't maybe confront his mother directly right away, Guyuk systematically targeted those closest to her. His first major move, ordering the arrest and imprisonment of Fatima.
Wow, her closest advisor. The sorceress.
Exactly. Töregene's most powerful advisor. Then her key ministers, her supporters, swiftly removed from their positions, punished.
How did Töregene react to this, seeing everything she'd built being dismantled by her own son?
According to the sources, her reaction was extreme. She was reportedly devastated, became severely ill, refused to eat or drink.
Just complete shock and despair.
The tension between mother and son escalated dramatically after Fatima's arrest and Guyuk's purges. And this culminated, tragically, in the death of Töregene Khatun. The woman who had effectively ruled the vast Mongol realm reportedly died of grief and despair over her son's actions.
Unbelievable. And what happened to Fatima in the end?
Guyuk had Fatima tortured and executed. The accusation of sorcery, possibly directed at his mother through her advisor, was reportedly used as justification for this brutal act.
And he just kept going.
Following this, he continued the systematic purge of Töregene's appointees, effectively trying to erase her influence, her legacy, from the court and administration she had controlled for 5 long years. So what does this all mean? When you step back, Töregene Khatun's story, as revealed in your sources, it's truly remarkable. It offers these deep insights into the realities of power within the Mongol Empire.
Yeah, she wasn't just some consort with influence behind the scenes.
No, she was a sovereign in her own right, a political mastermind, a diplomat, and, a shrewd power engineer.
What the sources really show us is how she masterfully navigated those incredibly complex harem rivalries, didn't she? Against powerful women like Borakshin and Mo. We see her use strategic, even if brief, alliances like that one with Chazate, and deploy really cunning tactics, even just spreading rumors to consolidate her position.
That rise itself is incredible.
Her incredible rise, yeah. From a captured merchant bride to the regent of this vast Mongol empire. It's just a powerful testament to her political skill, her relentless determination.
And that 5-year delay of the Kurultai.
I know, delaying the Kurultai for 5 years, using targeted patronage, those administrative purges, it offers such a clear insight into how she manipulated the existing structures to make sure her son Guyuk got selected.
Even against Ögedei's own stated will and despite Guyuk's own past failures and unpopularity.
Exactly. But her reign, while it achieved her goal, wasn't without significant controversy, significant disruption. The sources really detail that.
Oh, definitely. The implementation of those incredibly harsh tax increases.
Taxing people as commodities.
Even that. It highlights the aggressive, centralizing, extractive nature of her economic policies. And it gives insight into the direct causes of unrest, like that rebellion led by Temujin.
And her relationship with advisors like Fatima.
That close, almost indispensable relationship sheds light on the personal dynamics, those accusations of undue influence, maybe sorcery, that were all woven into her political maneuvers.
So ultimately, her intense drive to put her son on the throne, it brought her to the absolute height of power. It enabled this unprecedented regency for a woman.
But, as the sources reveal, that same ambition, maybe that same son, ultimately led to her dramatic and tragic downfall when he asserted his own authority.
Töregene's example, it fundamentally showed the potential for flexibility, for unconventional leadership within the Mongol system, didn't it? It allowed a woman to directly rule.
It did. But it also clearly highlighted the profound discomfort her rule caused among a significant chunk of the male aristocracy.
And that tension, the sources suggest, contributed to a noticeable decrease in women's direct involvement in state affairs right after her death.
Yes, a sort of backlash, perhaps. She remains this singularly powerful, consequential figure in history, a woman who really broke the mold, even if it was only for a relatively short time.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, thinking about the broader picture. Considering Töregene's success was so deeply rooted in this blend of strategic alliances, the skillful elimination of rivals, the manipulation of existing traditions like delaying the Kurultai for years, it raises a really important question, doesn't it? When you look at power dynamics in almost any historical context, how much of achieving ultimate power relies less on, say, inherent right or established rules or traditional lineage, and more on just sheer political will, the strategic use of resources like wealth and patronage, and maybe the ruthless ability to outmaneuver opponents regardless of gender or what anyone expected.